What are centralized and decentralized exchanges?
So the traditional way in which the exchange of things was managed was through a trusted third party. So somebody who's got something to buy and somebody who's got something to sell would place those things onto a marketplace that's run by a third party, and that third party would ensure that the seller received the funds and that the buyer received the goods. So they performed firstly what we would call a custodial role, meaning that they're holding things on behalf of others. And then they fulfilled a settlement role, which is to make sure that the transaction settled. And that information is stored in a system that is controlled by that third party. And you actually transfer your assets into the custody of that third party whilst you're using their system. That's centralized exchanges, if you will. So when people log into centralized exchanges, you create a wallet, which is a centralized exchange wallet, which is actually a wallet that is operated by that central organization. And so you're transferring your points, your cryptocurrencies, into a wallet that's actually operated by this third-party organization. Those kinds of exchanges were the first generation of exchanges to deal with cryptocurrencies, and have become, because they were the first ones, were the dominant ones. But a lot of people inside the cryptocurrency ecosystem were always concerned about the idea that you would have to rely upon some third party to handle your affairs and to ensure that you could transact with someone else. And that reliance on that single third party created a point of significant security risk, because that third party now is like a honeypot where all these things, all these assets of value are being stored in an environment operated by that third party. The third party could have a backdoor, take all your things. They could be attacked. So someone could hack their systems and take all their things. And that happens a lot. So we know that central exchanges have been hacked over the last 7 or 8 years. And it's because they firstly just act as those honeypots, which become very, very attractive for people who want to steal things. The decentralized exchange stuff was the next generation of development from centralized exchanges that sought to overcome the two dominant characteristics of central exchanges, which was the role of a third-party custodian and the security risks involved in having that central third-party actor. And so what decentralized exchange technologies seek to do is to enable people to come together and exchange on a peer-to-peer basis, where the tokens that they're exchanging always reside in each person's respective wallets. And when the exchange is done, it's an instant swap without the need to go through some other third party to check that the currency is what it is and all those things. And then eventually 3 days later, transfer the funds to, the new person's account. So the idea of being able to do it peer to peer was what has inspired the development of decentralized exchanges. And I think it's fair to say that we've had now 2 generations of decentralized exchanges. Traditional exchanges had a particular look and feel to them. You would go onto an exchange and you would see at the top of the screen people who had listed the number of things they want to sell and how much they would sell them for. And then at the bottom of the screen, you would have a list of people who have indicated that they want to buy these things at a certain price. And then there's a matching where when the price matches, then the exchange takes place. So that's how that sort of traditional decentralized exchange look and feel emulated, so that you've had that very, very traditional experience of a market. The second generation of decentralized exchanges are more like swaps. So they're more direct swap markets where the price of the exchange is determined not so much by these buy bids and sell bids, which eventually match somewhere, but by a mathematical equation that adjusts the relative exchange value between two things based on the ratio of these two things in a marketplace. So as people exchange one for the other, they're changing the relative ratio. And as you change that ratio, the price moves up and down a price curve. So that swap market is the more modern or the latest variation on the decentralized technology, decentralized exchange technology. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, the analogy always helps. Like that analogy was really good. I think I actually understand it now. That's awesome.
Right. I'll give you another little idea here. A lot of our research at the moment is focused around this idea of common knowledge, okay, and some related concepts. So some of the related concepts are things like what we call mutual knowledge. And common knowledge is something that everybody within a defined group knows. That's the first thing. But that we all know that each one else also knows. So I know that you know that you know that I know that, et cetera, about the same thing. And that kind of knowledge is something that levels out the playing field, if you will. Language is a classic case in point, where if there was no such thing as common knowledge, it would be impossible for me to communicate with you, because your reactions would be entirely unpredictable, because you wouldn't have a clue what I was saying. So when I talk about a red pen, we all know that there is something that I mean by red, and that I know that you know that I know that you know what I mean by red. So that common knowledge is like that blockchain ledger, where all the computers have that common knowledge. Then we have what we call mutual knowledge, which is that we all know the same thing, but we don't know whether someone else knows the same thing, okay? And that's often the case, where we both see something happen in the world. So we both actually know that it happened, but until we communicate with each other, we don't know that we each know the same thing, okay? And these ideas of information sharing, if you will, and information symmetry, that we know the same things, is really important in thinking about how people are able to actually exchange things on a peer-to-peer basis. The reason why in the past we had these trusted third parties is that the buyer couldn't be sure that the seller was actually going to sell what they claimed to be selling, and the seller couldn't be sure that the buyer was going to pay the money. But once we actually achieve a state of information symmetry, where we both know what it is that you're selling, and you know that I have the ability to buy, then we can move forward and transact with confidence without that third party being in the middle. So blockchain technologies and the information systems that they allow societies and groups of people to create enable us to progressively achieve an environment where information is much more likely to be symmetric amongst the people within that network than it is to be asymmetric. And symmetric information is at the very heart of achieving fair systems, because people who know more than someone else have an unfair advantage.